English villages have... Oh, come on, sorry. English villages have an abundance of history, and Sawtry is no exception. In this film we explore some of the more interesting aspects of the village. Although not attempting to provide a complete doomsday account of life from the year dot, you'll discover why. For example, the Romans were here. We'll show you a field with a circle and talk about a building that looks old, but is actually fairly new, as well as some others that simply aren't here anymore, all gone in the name of progress. You'll hear stories about village life, times before houses had running water and going to the loo involved a bucket, when it took all day to wash the laundry and a week to dry it. You'll see Sawtry from the air and witness the progress of village development through time, using up-to-date computer-animated maps. In addition to all this, you'll hopefully learn just a little bit more about a number of local organisations, meet village characters, and we'll even explain the origin of some of the many road names. Just keep watching. There's a lot of history in Sawtry, it's just having the time to look. But the real tricky bit is knowing where to start.
There's no better place to start than where I stand now, near the historic sign beside All Saints Churchyard. Over to my right is Tort Hill Field, and over there is a big circle about 40 yards in diameter, because this was the gun emplacement of Cromwell's during the 17th century, during the English Civil War. Now the cannons were near the bank of the circle with their barrels pointing up to the top. They would have had wooden stakes stuck in and also protection each side with baskets. And in the middle would have been the cannonballs and the gunpowder to keep out of the way of the firing cannon. They had a big square embankment round the circle one with an entrance at the bottom where the soldiers camped. And they had tents for soldiers, but the officer would have had a horse and he would have rode into Sawtry village and billeted himself in a house there. Now, the cannon can fire over a mile. Whatever size it is, it can fire a mile, even the little ones. So they had a good range, and to Conington it's about within a mile, and I should think they could reach Glatton Road, the B660 from here, and also south they could fire a cannon shot all the way down there towards, I should think, the Red Wings garage. And also the Romans used this site in the old days, I should think, as a lookout point down the Old North Road, then the Ermine Street. The Roman settlement was actually underneath the southbound carriageway now, and it was, well, they dug right down from the hill, it was a hill, and they dug right down quite a long way, so the Roman settlement really would have disappeared completely. It's been dug away, but they found a lot. The Romans were here because they invaded us in AD 42, and they came up from London, the 9th Legion, and they took about 2 years around a year to 2 years to settle this area quite forcefully with their troops. And on the way they built Ermine Street, and settlements developed each side of Ermine Street. So we think that's how the Sawtry could have started, with the Romans having a sort of little chef sort of thing between Godmanchester and the River Ouse, Dura Brevi. And this would be a good stopping place for the troops on their march through. Oh, it's very nice to see water in the moat again, because in the old days it was a moated site with a manor house on it, and it was full of water. But then in 1939, when they dug the gully away for road improvements, it drained the water all out of the moat. Because before then it used to run into the moat from the ditches, but now they built the A1M and banked it all up. The water's come back again, and it's rather nice and pleasant to see. Picture a timber frame building, like them you see in some towns, with wattle and door between the timbers, and the early house would have had shutters but not windows, and later on it could have had windows.
Across the road lies the site of St Andrew's Church and Graveyard, the church being easily identified on account of the 3 small dormer windows built into the south side of the roof, presumably in an attempt to let in more light. The church, featured in the Domesday Book of 1086, was finally demolished in 1879, but the site still remains, preserved as a conservation area.
This graveyard of St Andrews is full of history, very interesting place to be, and of course it's got the old people of Sawtry who built Sawtry up over the years. Every gravestone tells a tale. There's many sad ones here. One sad one is about 3 children and the father dying of the smallpox. There's 2 or 3, or more than 2 or 3 cases of that. And of course they died of the flu, they're bad case of the flu, they'd die. And of course sanitary wasn't very good, so it wasn't very nice in them days. We're a lot better off these days than they were.
Standing in St Andrew's churchyard in the 12th century and looking southeast towards Wood Walton Church, an impressive structure rising above the lowlands would have been Sawtry Abbey, a Cistercian abbey founded in 1147 and once a resting place for the cortege of Catherine of Aragon on her final journey to Peterborough Cathedral in 1521. However, despite its grandeur and importance, it failed to survive the dissolution of the monasteries in 1539 and was destroyed under the orders of King Henry VIII. Today, little, if anything, remains of the abbey. Walking up to All Saints' Church, a visitor would be forgiven for overlooking the stones standing against the wall, but this innocuous pile of rubble is actually the remains of Sawtry Abbey. Talk of history, one would imagine the local village church would have seen all changes possible, but appearances can be deceptive.
Well, this isn't the first building that's been on this site. In fact, there was an older version of All Saints Church that was demolished in 1879. So although this looks as if it's been here for ages, in fact, it's only been around for about 120 years. Well, the old church we know was here at the time of the Domesday Book in 1086, and it was very similar in design to the existing building, except that the old building had a tower, and in fact it was the tower that was one of the problems in terms of the condition of the building. The bell here, which we actually ring still every Sunday before services, is one of the oldest bells in the whole of Huntingdonshire. The original All Saints had 2 bells, and one of them got taken away to one of the schools in Peterborough, and unfortunately it's just completely disappeared. But the other one has been retained in this existing building, and it's there up in the bell tower. There are 1 or 2 interesting things in our church, some of which came from the old All Saints building. There are a number of coffin lids which are here, which date back over a number of years. There's some brasses that people come to look at from far and wide for Lemoyne, who was one of the lords of the manor. There are some ancient oak chests which used to hold the church documents and things such as that. And also we've got a number of stained glass windows. All Saints Church is surrounded by its own churchyard, and they contain the remains of many of the people who lived here in our village. Unfortunately, as the village has expanded, there's been a need for more grave spaces, and initially this was taken account by a new parish graveyard adjoining All Saints. That too is now filling up, and so a new graveyard has been purchased adjoining St Andrews.
St Andrew's graveyard features an iron gate with a hexagonal symbol in the middle, a symbol which can also be seen in the village sign on the green and gives a clue to the origin of the name Sawtry. One of the earliest records of Sawtry shows it with a spelling of Saltrium, which roughly translated means landing place for sellers of salt. This was true, for much of the fens was either underwater or at least very boggy, and barges would regularly journey up to the quayside, now near Greenfields, to unload cargoes of salt, which had been produced locally in the fens through evaporation. Back to the village sign, and there's more. 4 coats of arms for a few of the many lords of the manor. An acknowledgement of changing diets, that's the geese and eels. Bullocks, representing the old Bullock Road, at one time the main artery in and out of the village. Then there's the original parishes of St Andrews, St Judith's and All Saints. It's all there, plus more, all on the sign, somewhere. The best way to get an overview of Sawtry is from the air, and where better to go than Connington Flying Club, previously home to the American Air Force flying daylight raids over Europe in B-17 and B-24 bombers, but today a more sedate approach to flying rules the runways. From the air, the scale of Sawtry is all too apparent. Plenty of houses, that's for sure, and a village perimeter that follows natural boundaries. And then there's the new A1M motorway. But what did the village look like? Just under 10 years ago, this was the scene, pretty much as Sawtry is today, with a few exceptions. No motorway, so no Bill Hall Way. And the prefabs have gone in Park Road. And you could still join the A1 northbound by driving down Tort Hill, a road that's still there today. So there we are, Sawtry back in 1993. Travel back even further in time, and this is the picture. In 1945, just a handful of roads. No college, no Gloucester Road, no Manor Drive, no Newton Road, no Deer Park Road. In fact, a completely different village. But one thing it did have was pubs. The most southern pub in Sawtry at the turn of the century had a sign that depicted a black bull. Known to locals as simply the Bull, the Durham Ox was situated at the junction of St Judith's Lane and Green End Road.
Mr. Charlie Scotney and his wife Ella kept the pub there, and there used to be a little room on the side where my dad and a few other cronies used to play dominoes on a Saturday night. And it's still there today. It still looks like it ever was, the Durham Ox.
Moving slightly further up the village, the next pub you'd find was, and still is, the Bell. But despite the odd sign, pubs weren't much more than a converted front room.
But they were basically just somebody's houses, you know, and these rooms, the Bell particularly was like Mrs. Parker's house, and the tap room was one of her rooms.
The building's still the same, but there was more land with it than there is now. And my granddad he had a couple of cows in the field and used to sell milk. He also had some horse and carts, which he'd done contracting with when he was at the Bell. And in them days, they used to have the big old barrels with the brass taps on that you put a glass under and just drew it off then. There were no beer pumps and that like there is now. And I got into the cellar and got a glass because I was dry, it was warm, and I turned the tap on and turned it on all right because I had the flow of the beer behind it when I turned it on. But when I tried to turn it off, I couldn't turn it off. And the beer all ran onto the floor, and I daren't go and tell anybody at the time. But I think they realised they had done it. Yeah.
It was more young people got in, because my sister-in-law Vera used to play the piano, Hubert Baxter used to play the drums with her brushes, set in the corner, and on a Saturday or Sunday night, that was we used to go to another pub down there, that was packed because all the land girls and the wafts of the girls got in there, so all those young blokes used to, it was a drawing plaster for us to go down there to it. We used to have a sing-song in there, and up there we had a couple of punch-ups and one thing and another and such like, and we used to have a good time in there. Altogether we had a really, really good time in there, because that was a trendy place of the village them days.
Part of the Bell used to be a bakery, and, on account of its consistent warm temperature, occasionally doubled up as the village mortuary. This could possibly then help to explain the strange goings-on.
I came down one morning about 7:45 on my own, and I was just opening the curtains, and as I moved along near the fireplace, all of a sudden I just heard this scrape, like a scrunch sound across the floor, and I looked across over my left shoulder, and this chair was just moving across the floor with this eerie scraping sound, and stopped, and it must have moved, I suppose, a good 2 feet, and I just sort of looked and thought, pulled the curtains open as quick as I could, and then ran down the side of the pub and just opened as many curtains as I could, and double-checked everywhere that no one was pulling a prank on me, but without any shadow of a doubt, that's what I saw. And it really went cold, and the chair just sat there, and it took me about half an hour before I could compose myself to put it back again. After I'd had my sort of experience with the chair, quite a few of the regulars said, oh, that'd be the old customer who's, once again, a ghost who's been seen by several people, and he frequents that corner, and his favourite sort of spot was by the fireplace, leaning on the mantel with his pints, and that's his little area, so he's often been seen standing there, leaning against the fireplace, enjoying a quiet beer.
So next time your pint mysteriously disappears, you could always blame someone else.
Oh, has anyone seen my pint?
The Cross Keys stood at the junction of Green End and Gidding Road, often called Johnson's Corner. Travel back in time to the very early 1900s, and this would be the scene. Sadly, it's gone, demolished to make way for the Greenways shopping centre, built in the 1960s. Suffering a significantly better fate than the Cross Keys, the Chequers still remains to this day, proudly overlooking the village green, which was once a focal point for many a village function, including Feast Week and May Day celebrations, the village fair and the local hunt.
That was a favourite pub in the village, and there used to be more beer spilt when it was Sawtry Feast Week there than there is drank today. And that's the truth. Spilt outside in the yard. They had real big booze ups there, you know, and everyone, the big farmers used to go there. And if they were too busy, you could go and help yourself to a pint and leave the money on the barrel if you wanted to. They were quite happy to do that. The atmosphere was quite good. They talked about everything, and they played cards, they played dominoes and darts.
But dominoes and darts aren't to everyone's taste. How about a big satellite television showing all-day football?
It wouldn't have went down in those days when you think of the people that used to be in the Chequers playing dominoes and that sort of thing, and darts. I can't see as the music they've on now and the satellite TV that went down very well in there in them days. In fact, I think if somebody had brought a satellite television in those days in the Chequers, it would have soon been flung across the road onto the green.
One fella used to go in there, he lived down Fen Lane, I forget his name now, but when he had a feel, he used to get safety pins out and pin his lips together and do tricks like that. Put one through his nose as well. There's quite some characters there.
One character known to everyone was Linnet.
And every bit of mischief or fiddle, Linnet were in it. He were in it. And he was a good old character, he was.
He used to go across miles looking for mushrooms and then come back and sell them, perhaps to the same bloke whose field he'd pinched them from. He was a real character.
He didn't like it because I used to go and get mushrooms. He thought they all should be his, you see. So I used to get up early mornings and go before he came because I knew he wouldn't get here too soon. And if there were some mushrooms there, I used to leave the stalks for him to see and put a little notice up. I ain't going to tell you what I put on it. can't tell you that.
Leaving the congenial atmosphere of the Chequers, the next pub you'd stumble across was the Oddfellows Arms in Church Street.
Well, it was like the extension of the row of houses, but where you went in the door, if you didn't go in the yard to go into the back door, there was like they'd put on a little bay window type thing, whereby they'd have what they call a settle. It's still there. The house, it's very similar to what it was, but it wasn't noticed. It didn't have a pub-looking front to it or anything.
One place that did look more like a traditional pub was the Royal Oak.
That was very popular. People used to go there. I mean, you could walk across the A1 then. You could see a car coming in the distance, and perhaps if you come out at 10 o'clock at night, you wouldn't see any. I mean, absolutely clear.
The Royal Oak, no longer around, one of the many buildings demolished during the latest A1M widening scheme. Before the 1900s, though, Sawtry had many other drinking establishments, inns. Part of this building, for example, in Tort Hill, was actually Alehouse Cottage, serving locals during the time of the French Revolution in 1789.